Zelda. Everybody in the entire world loves Zelda. Zelda 2, on the other hand, maybe not quite as much. This was only the second game in the Zelda series, and while it retained a few elements from the original, it also added and changed a lot of things, turning it into a side-scrolling action platformer type game with a handful of RPG elements. Funny to think that even as far back as 1987, Nintendo was out here flipping the script and changing the whole game, even when people didn't want them to. While the game definitely has its fans, it is, or at least was, often considered to be the black sheep of the series, which is odd considering it was only the second game, so a lot of the things that people come to expect from Zelda were not yet fully established. You could probably call it something of an experimental game, but back in those days, most games were experimental to some degree, right? Although Zelda would see a return to form, there are still a lot of people who enjoy Zelda 2. That being said, it is still held back by a number of issues that make the game frustrating to play. Most notoriously, it's got some of that old school style of difficulty where the game is just a dick. Link, no, put it away. Like I said yesterday, the NES library is where masochistic gamers go to get killed. Even the easier games in the library make Bloodborne look like GTA 5's single-player campaign. Even though it is nowhere near as hard as Ninja Gaymen or Battle Hose, Zelda 2 is probably one of the hardest Zelda games out there. Not that it has a lot of tough competition, the games are generally not that hard. Except the first one. Oddly enough though, I actually happen to enjoy this one. The older I get, the more I find RPG elements to be kind of comforting in a game. It's kind of like reassurance that I can make myself stronger in the game even if I'm having difficulty actually getting better at the game. And it kind of makes it such that none of your time playing is wasted because you're building yourself up, even when you're not reaching the next progression point. It also has a great soundtrack, like who could forget the temple theme? Most people I know heard it in Smash first, but always remember, it came from Zelda 2. This is a very old video game, so it's completely fair that it has a couple of shortcomings. The save system is primitive and requires you to either get game over or hold up and A on the second controller port. Classic NES, of course you can't just pause and have some shit that says save. The dialogue is also very slow and runs at 3 characters per hour. It's like a grandma trying to text you an oatmeal cookie recipe on her new iPhone, which is especially cumbersome considering half the NPCs in this game just say some shit like, "Sorry, I am completely useless and I'm only in the game to make the world look more lively. Please buy a Wii U so Miyamoto can eat food this week." In summation, it's a great game that is held back by some of the usual stuff that comes with age. Games like Zelda 2 have a lot of potential, and with the power of modern hardware and game design sensibilities, there is no particular reason they should be held back by the inadequacies of a more experimental era. All it takes is for somebody to make it happen. And turns out, they did. What I have today is Zelda 2 Enhanced PC Edition, aka PC Enhanced Edition, aka Enhanced Edition PC. Some combination of those words. This is a PC conversion of the game that adds a lot of flourishes and improvements and an expanded and enhanced map. People are calling this the definitive way to play the game, and I have to agree. This is my game right here. When I heard about this game, I wasn't expecting much beyond a deluxe-y version that brushes up on some of the game's more frustrating moments, which would have been really cool on its own. It also wouldn't have been the first time I played something like that. Metroid Planets, although it had a lot of extra content, new musical remixes, and a handful of graphical enhancements, I mostly enjoyed that game for being an optimal version of the original Metroid, which is another one of my favorite NES titles. Fan-generated works that improve and update the base game are becoming more common nowadays. I remember this year's F3 actually showed off a version of the Donald Duck game on the N64 that actually fixed the broken music. And if you want to go back even further than that, there's the DK64 mod that lets you swap characters anywhere you want. Zelda 2 Enhanced PC port, on the other hand, is way more than just a polished version of an existing game. This is a massive, massive expansion for the original, complete with all kinds of new levels and side quests. The world is far more open and lively. There are a lot more secret areas and places and collectibles. It is such that it may as well be an entirely new game. Even if you played the original game 100 times, perhaps especially then, you're gonna want to play this one just for all that new stuff. Going into this game and finding this massively expanded world was a really nice surprise for someone who was just expecting Zelda 2 with better controls and stuff. The QOL improvements were the thing I was expecting to be the primary focus of this game, and they actually end up being almost superfluous flourishes in the face of new and dramatically overhauled content. Wonderfully appreciated though they are. Most towns have a lady that saves your game for you, which is a pretty straightforward system. They also made it so that when you get a game over, you retain 25% of your experience instead of losing it all. This doesn't make the game easy per se, but it softens the blow of the game's punishment regimen, which makes it less infuriating to play, and that is a good thing. Nobody ever has fun when they're angry. They even sped up the text. Now that's what I like to see. I also appreciated how my controller just worked right out of the gate. I didn't have to mess with the settings or anything, just boosh, done. At its core, the game is still fundamentally the same. Battle your way through all of Link's most notorious foes, like the skulls that take 9,000 hits to kill, the shield guys that make me really mad, all to stop the resurrection of Link's arch-nemesis, Ganon, and of course Link's actual arch-nemesis,
the Ku Klux Klan!
One thing that surprised me about this remake was the difficulty. Zelda 2 is a notoriously tough game, so I figured, if anything, they'd make the game easier. The last thing I expected was for them to actually increase the difficulty. Now, from a purely logical perspective, I have to assume that somebody who is rebuilding Zelda 2 probably knows way more about the game than I do, and has a much better understanding of how to make it better. But at the same time, there's a voice in my head that won't shut up, and he keeps saying, what kind of f***ing psycho looks at Zelda 2 of all games and says, yeah, you know what this game's problem is? It's not hard enough. In the original game, you start out with 4 bars of health and 4 bars of magic. In this version, you only start with 3. I don't know if the actual numerical value they represent is different or the same, but I will add this. To upgrade these bars, you can't just find a single heart chamber like in the original. You have to hunt down 3 or 4 of them just to get 1 extra bar. Kinda like the later games. This decision makes the game more challenging in the short term, but also further encourages exploration and paying attention to the world in the long term, which ends up making it more engaging. Another thing you have to remember though is that Zelda 2 isn't just difficult on the second-to-second gameplay end, it's also a big sprawling game where it can be very tough to figure out what you're actually supposed to do. There are some puzzles and collectibles that may seem cryptic by today's metrics, especially if you haven't played the game before. Of course, chances are, if you're playing an enhanced deluxe-y version of this game made by a fan, you probably already played the original, and if that's the case, you'll already be expecting that kind of stuff, if you didn't just straight up remember where all the secrets and progression points actually are. If you've never played Zelda 2 before, don't go into this expecting something less cryptic and more straightforward, because that's fundamental to the experience. Graphically, it does retain the art style completely, which is the right thing to do, but the widescreen ratio is very much appreciated and it scales perfectly on my display. There are also some little things that make the world feel a little bit more alive, like scrolling clouds in the sky. It's a small thing, but when you're used to the static set pieces of the original game, those small things start to become very noticeable. The game also scrolls a lot more smoothly, which is pretty expected again, but it's still nice to see. At the end of the day, Zelda 2 PC Enhanced Edition is exactly what it is. It's a great game that has been polished and enhanced, and in my opinion, is the best way to play that game. If you're already a fan of Zelda 2, this is a no-brainer. And if you've never played Zelda 2 before, try this version on for size. It might not be easier, but it is better. And remember to tune in tomorrow. As usual, I will not tell you what it is, but you'll know it when you pick it up. Merry Christmas, everyone!